Hispaniola in the West Indies around 1640. The Buccaneers of the West Indies relied on surprise. Much of what we know of their deeds comes through one book, The Buccaneers of America, which was first published in Dutch in 1678. It was written by a man who sailed with them for 6 years. When Exelkamin sailed for the West Indies, he had no intention of being a pirate. He had been sold as an indentured servant to the governor of Tortuga.
Through the many miseries I endured, I was thrown into a dangerous fit of sickness.
Alarmed that Exelkamin was going to die, his master sold him quickly for 70 pieces of 8 to a surgeon who taught him the trade. And from this man, Exelkamin won his freedom.
Being now at liberty, I determined to enter into the wicked order of the pirates.
Exelkamin's pen was to make them famous and infamous for the next 300 years. The Buccaneers first settled on Hispaniola. They were mainly runaway slaves, scratching a living. From the native Arawak Indians, the Buccaneers learned the art of curing meat, smoking it over a greenwood fire so that it would keep for a long time. It was a community that had to struggle to survive. A little hunting, a little trading, a little robbery. Despite the fact that they were only a minor nuisance, Philip III of Spain ordered his governor in Cuba to take action against them.
We do not permit foreign intrusions of our islands. Destroy their means of support and you will destroy them.
The Spanish attacked Hispaniola, Santo Domingo, and Haiti, where they slaughtered cattle and pigs and took any prisoners they could find. But they did not manage to destroy the Buccaneers. Some went to live on Tortuga until it was safe to return to Hispaniola. All of them now bitterly hated the Spaniards. The first buccaneer to really harm Spanish interests was Pierre Le Grand, who was born in Dieppe. He set out in a small boat, hoping to find a prize.
We searched the sea for days. We were hungry, thirsty, frightened. But when we saw their ship, we knew our lives would change.
Are you devils?
Just buccaneers. I decided to sail back to France at once, before the King of Spain discovered what I had done to his property. I disappeared from history and enjoyed the rest of my life.
The planters and hunters of Tortuga celebrated his success, and they resolved to follow Pierre's example.
The Spanish had only contempt for the Buccaneers, partly because they were Protestants, and partly because of their squalid way of life.
These are the butcher's vilest servants, who work 8 days in the slaughterhouse and never wash.
Until 1655, the Buccaneers had no real allies. Then Oliver Cromwell, the Lord Protector of England, sent an expedition to conquer Hispaniola.
Your Majesty will be pleased to know that our Spanish troops routed Cromwell's heretics.
But Cromwell's army captured Jamaica instead, largely because the island was completely undefended. The English moved the capital from Spanish Town to Port Royal, and ironically, did the Buccaneers a great favor. Protestant England was at war with Catholic Spain again, and for the first time since 1603, piracy against Spain was quietly encouraged by Whitehall. The British immediately saw the potential of Port Royal. Its sea lanes and quays allow only one channel into the port. Its guns could command the entry to the harbour. The British built 4 forts on this spit of land, and so they laid the foundation for the heyday of the Buccaneers. This magnificent house belonged to one young soldier, John Colbeck. Colbeck would eventually become Speaker of the Assembly of Jamaica just when Henry Morgan was Prince of the Buccaneers. Like almost everyone who lived in Jamaica then, Colbeck got rich partly on the profits of buccaneering. Exelkamin was not interested in petty brigands. He wanted to record heroic deeds, like those of Pierre le Grand, Henry Morgan, and Francois l'Olonnais, a Frenchman who bitterly hated all Spaniards. One of l'Olonnais' triumphs was to attack the town of Maracaibo, which was surrounded by beautiful plantations. The people of the town were terrified.
There were 2,000 pirates swarming through the jungle. They yelled as they marched. We didn't know what to do.
In panic, the citizens of Maracaibo fled across the bay with all the goods and money they could. Those who did not flee found themselves at the mercy of l'Olonnais.
Under torture, prisoners revealed the hiding place of their treasure. Besides burning with matches and slight torments, prisoners were cut to pieces. First some flesh, then a hand, an arm, a leg, sometimes tying a cord about his neck and twisting it with a stick till the eyes shoot out.
Torture to extract information was acceptable. Torture for the sake of it was not. L'Olonnais appeared to enjoy it too much for Exelkamin to be comfortable.
It was the custom of l'Olonnais that having tormented any persons and they not confessing, he would instantly tear them in pieces with his anger and pull out their tongues. Once he cut open one of those poor Spaniards and pulled out his heart with his sacrilegious hands and began to gnaw it with his teeth like a ravenous wolf.
In Exelkamin's view, l'Olonnais had become a cannibal just like the Indians and fully deserved his fate.
L'Olonnais was captured by the Darien Indians, who he had mightily abused. They tore him to pieces alive, throwing his body limb by limb into the fire and his ashes into the air.
Exelkamin admired the courage of the Buccaneers, but he was critical of their cruelty, a conflict that is evident in his account of Sir Henry Morgan. Morgan was born in 1635 in Wales in a small manor on the garden estate of Tredegar. Tredegar is a magnificent house, and Morgan always claimed he came from an aristocratic family. Historians are not sure. Many think he was actually born in a rather more modest farmhouse nearby called Pencarron. There are many pictures of Morgan, but historians don't believe any are authentic. Not even this portrait from the first edition of Exelkamin's book. There is also some mystery about how and why Morgan went to the West Indies. Exelkamin claimed he sold himself as an indentured servant. Morgan always denied this. He was a gentleman adventurer. Certainly, by 1658, he was learning his trade from a British officer, Christopher Mings.
I land my men some distance from the town. March them inland, go around the defenses, and then attack from the rear where they least expect us.
Is it always that simple?
For me, yes. I've taken treasure all over the Americas, from Maine to Santiago de Cuba. More treasure than Drake.
By the time Morgan became one of them, the Buccaneers had developed some strange and almost progressive practices. They were known as the Brethren of the Coast. By the standards of the time, they were remarkably democratic. It was their custom to elect a captain for each expedition. The captain and the crew each had a contract. The contract determined how much booty each member of the crew would get. The contract specified that during a battle, the captain had to be obeyed. At any other time, a meeting of the crew could be convened to question his tactics and his plans. The meeting could vote to depose him. If a buccaneer was wounded in battle, there was a set rate of compensation. Losing a leg was worth 500 pieces of 8, an eye, 100 pieces. By the age of 23, Morgan had impressed his fellows enough to be elected commander.
Boys, over there.
The first expeditions Morgan carried out proved he had courage, cunning, and luck. Morgan raided the town of Portobello on the Atlantic coast of Panama, where the Spanish gathered treasure to ship back to Europe.
Captain Morgan believed the governor would not fire if he saw monks and nuns exposed, so he forced them to use ladders to climb the walls of the fort.
But the governor paid no heed. Monks and nuns were slaughtered. The town was taken, its treasury was taken. The spoils were massive.
They found in ready money 250,000 pieces of 8, besides cloth, linen, and other goods. This exploit made Captain Morgan famous.
His next target was Maracaibo, which had just been attacked by L'Ollonais.
We called Maracaibo the Little Venice of Europe. It boasted many grand houses with balconies overlooking the lagoon.
Morgan took the city easily enough. But while he was there, 3 Spanish galleons arrived off the harbor. Morgan was outnumbered. He tried to negotiate his way out. He offered the Spanish reasonable terms.
That he would quit Maracaibo without doing any damage to the town, nor exacting any ransom. That he would set at liberty all the prisoners.
But the Spanish felt sure they finally had Morgan trapped and were in no mood to compromise.
The Spanish had gathered forces in the fort. Morgan wanted them to believe he would fight them on land.
What happened at Maracaibo proves what a good commander Morgan was. The situation was desperate. His answer was a classic ploy.
Morgan gave us our orders. As soon as we reached the top of the hill, we were to hide. The Spanish would think we thought we were really cunning, hiding from them. We could see them turn their cannons round to blow us to smithereens. But the Spanish never guessed the truth, as Morgan knew they wouldn't. We were on our bellies, crawling back through the filthy jungle. It was horrible. Itchy, full of ants. We had to be quiet, but we smiled. We were heading for the beach. We smiled as we crawled back into our boats. We smiled as we hid under the skins. Each boat was rowed back to the big ships by one man. That's what it looked like to the Spanish.
That night, Morgan sailed out. By the time the Spanish discovered what he was doing, their guns were in the wrong place, facing the wrong direction. Morgan was soon out of range and heading back to Port Royal. Then, a new political situation in Europe interfered with piracy. In London, Oliver Cromwell died. The monarchy was restored. King Charles II was more sympathetic to Catholics and wanted the goodwill of Spain. In Spanish Town and Port Royal, Morgan found it hard to get permission for his next raid, an attack on Panama City itself. Usually, the Spaniards sailed their treasure fleet down the river Chagres to the fort at San Lorenzo. Morgan landed south of the Chagres, and with the help of local Indians who hated the Spanish, he set off through the hills and jungles. Morgan willed his men on. Morgan's army faced many obstacles: ants, disease, lack of water, lack of food.
Some persons who are never out of their mother's kitchen may ask how pirates could eat, swallow, and digest those pieces of leather. First, they sliced the leather. Then they beat it between two stones and rubbed it often, dipping it in the water of a river to render it supple and tender. Lastly, they scraped off the hair and roasted it.
But 9 days later, Morgan's men crossed this bridge into the outskirts of the city of Panama. The Spanish defended themselves valiantly.
We pursued the enemy so close, their retreat came to plain running.
The famous city of Panama was reduced to ruins by the battle. And now, for the first time, Morgan displayed those traits of cruelty that Exelkamin disapproved of.
You could be my queen, my mistress, my love.
I love my husband.
After a few days here with bread and water and rats, we'll see.
The only valuable the soldiers and monks of Panama managed to save was the golden altar of the cathedral. This was too heavy to lift, so they quickly painted it white, and Morgan ignored it, thinking it was just painted wood. Morgan's ships returned to Spanish Town laden with booty. The Jamaicans gave him a hero's welcome. The only man who was not happy was the governor. Britain had signed a treaty with Spain. As far as diplomats were concerned, Morgan was a pirate.
You're under arrest. You're sacrificing me to the King of Spain. I'd rather be a pirate than a politician.
Morgan was taken back to London, where his reputation intrigued the town.
I met Sir Henry Morgan. He was so charming, so heroic. I could have eaten him like a newfangled chocolate.
King Charles II was a complex character. He had a certain affection for rogues. He demanded to see Morgan and was fascinated by Morgan's stories.
Who better, sir, to stop piracy in Port Royal than its greatest pirate? I knight you and name you Governor General of Jamaica.
Morgan went back to Port Royal and established himself as the governor, as the king wanted. Morgan liked being governor of the island and was careful to catch enough pirates to satisfy King Charles. Port Royal developed into the richest port in the Caribbean. Every day in its bay, at least 100 ships were at anchor. The boats unloaded all kinds of cargo. One small sign of how rich Morgan became is this: his silver collection, which is still housed in a small church in Port Royal. The buccaneer, with breeding, loved the finest tankards, goblets, plates, and chalices. Morgan might now be respectable, but he had no intention of allowing that to interfere with his driving need to amass gold. In 1678, Exelkamin published his book. The descriptions of his own cruelty outraged Morgan, and he sued the publishers for libel and won. The second edition defended the great pirate, noting that other buccaneers had been more cruel than Morgan, and with rather typical British contempt for foreigners, that if those things were performed, the Spaniards deserved them. Meanwhile, in 1688, Morgan was dying. The great days of Port Royal as a buccaneer's capital were passing. But what finally reduced the place to the fishing village it is now was the great earthquake of 1692, which was seen as a judgment of God. Fishers and divers are the only ones who can admire the glories of Port Royal. The ruins lie 30 feet deep.